Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. I'd love to know. And if you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, let's jump in. The Drexar didn't just conquer planets. They erased them. Entire civilizations vanished overnight, wiped from existence without warning. Every transmission that warned of their approach ended with the same three words: run. They're here. It didn't matter how advanced a species was or how well defended their worlds were. The Drexar left nothing behind but blackened ruins. No diplomacy, no mercy, just fire from the skies and the destruction of everything in their path. The galaxy, stunned and afraid, stood still. There was no fight. The Council of 11, made up of the most powerful and intelligent alien species in the quadrant, made the decision to abandon the fight. They chose survival over resistance, advising everyone to evacuate, retreat, and preserve what knowledge they could. Wait for the storm to pass, they said. But the storm never passed. It only grew. The Drexar had a relentless hunger, and their numbers seemed endless. 4 galactic years into their rampage, they had swept across 3 entire sectors. Not even the fiercest warrior races could slow them down. Every attempt at resistance was crushed, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. But even in the darkest hours, a whisper began to spread across the stars. A whisper about a warship from a forgotten race. A ship designed for one purpose: to destroy. The humans had been gone for decades. Officially, they were considered non-compliant primitives, too chaotic to be trusted in the galactic fold. They were thrown out of the Galactic Accord for their refusal to disarm. The Council called them dangerous, unpredictable, and reckless. Humans didn't just fight, they reveled in it. The galaxy had grown to forget them, assuming humanity was nothing more than a relic of the past. But then, in the midst of the Drexar's latest conquest of a mid-tier trade planet called Kier 4, everything changed. Kier was a planet of little importance to the greater galaxy, a small trade hub of no real strategic value, until the Drexar arrived. And the Council? They didn't bother sending help. It was already written off, just another casualty in a war that seemed endless. Then something unprecedented happened. A signal from the Council's surveillance drones caught the attention of the galaxy. The Drexar's mothership, massive and intimidating, hovered over Kier 4 like a dark omen, its weapons charging for the kill. Below, the civilians of Kier 4 scrambled in panic, attempting to reach underground bunkers for safety. But then, just as all hope seemed lost, something strange occurred. The scanners glitched. Once, twice. And then a reading appeared on the screen. Classified vessel detected. There was no origin, no Council identification, no nothing. Just a blank space in the data. Until, with a low rumble, a massive black silhouette appeared on the scanners. The ship was unlike anything seen before. A dark, sleek behemoth cutting through space with the sharp precision of a blade. Its hull was bare. No flashy colors or translations. Just one name, etched in scarred steel across the side. HSS Vengeance. The Drexar mothership, likely confused by the sudden appearance of this unknown vessel, hesitated for just a moment. Then, in true Drexar fashion, it charged up its weapons, ready to obliterate this uninvited guest. The human warship, however, did not wait. It fired. The blast that shot out from the HSS Vengeance wasn't anything like the weapons used by the Council or any known race. It was different. Dense, burning with a force that rattled bones, even through the vacuum of space. It cut through the Drexar ship's shields like they were nothing, sending cracks through them as if they were glass. And then, to everyone's shock, the impossible happened. The Drexar ship flinched. It didn't fire back. It retreated. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Drexar, the most feared force in the galaxy, ran. The footage of that moment spread like wildfire. It was a sensation across every corner of the galaxy. Whispers turned into desperate messages. Find the humans. We need them. The Council, panicked by the sudden shift in the balance of power, sent transmission after transmission, hoping for a reply. But the humans didn't answer. At least, not politely. The HSS Vengeance didn't send a message, didn't acknowledge any calls for contact. It simply vanished, disappearing back into the blackness of space. The Drexar regrouped, furious and embarrassed. They struck again, this time at Goran Prime, to bury the humiliation they had suffered. Yet something had changed. Something the Drexar had never experienced before. Fear. They had always been the ones to instill terror. But now, they feared one thing. That ship, the HSS Vengeance, and the humans. But little did the galaxy know, the Vengeance was not alone. The HSS Vengeance was not alone, but the galaxy had no idea just how much danger this revelation would bring. The whispers about humanity had changed, shifting from disbelief and fear to something more desperate. The Drexar's defeat at the hands of a single human warship had sparked a fire across the galaxy. A fire that no one had anticipated. The Council, in their arrogance, thought the Drexar would simply regroup and move on. They had underestimated humanity, and that mistake would cost them more than they could imagine. But humanity, long forgotten, was not content to stay hidden in the shadows. They had been watching, waiting for the galaxy to crumble under the weight of its own peace treaties, watching as the Drexar ravaged the stars, certain that one day the galaxy would need them again. And when that day came, humanity would be ready. Out in the deep recesses of space, where the Council's reach had faltered and where Drexar had not yet set foot, the HSS Vengeance drifted. A lone figure stood at the helm, Commander Lynn Vale, a war-forged soldier from Earth, the last of her generation. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol of what humanity had become in their isolation. The Vengeance wasn't the sleek, technologically advanced ships the galaxy was used to seeing. It was raw, brutal, and old. A warship built for one purpose: to wage war without hesitation. Its hull was covered in battle scars, its systems aged and patched together with the kind of care only a species that had lived through war could manage. And inside, it smelled of burned circuits and blood. The air was thick with the scent of desperation and determination, the kind that could only come from a species that had been abandoned by the rest of the galaxy. Vale stood in front of the command window, watching the stars shimmer coldly outside. Her eyes, though tired, never wavered. She had fought wars on Earth long before it had been exiled. She had lived through the chaos of humanity's downfall, and now she had become the spearhead of the species' return. But even she couldn't predict how this war would unfold. Behind her, her tactical officer Jin sat at his console, eyes scanning the data pouring in. "Commander," he spoke, voice tight. Still no response from Earth. Radio silence. No acknowledgement from HQ. Vale snorted in frustration. Of course not. Typical. She wasn't surprised. When humanity had been kicked out of the Galactic Accord, they didn't beg for acceptance. They didn't make promises of peace. They simply vanished, cutting all ties with the galaxy that had deemed them too violent, too chaotic. Earth had gone dark, shutting down its satellites, its deep space relays, and every beacon that could be tracked. Humanity had made a pact with itself, a pact to survive on its own terms. The galaxy had no place for them, and they didn't need the galaxy. Yet here they were, facing the Drexar, the galaxy's greatest terror. And humanity would not stand by and let the galaxy burn while it waited for a better time to strike. Vale turned to face Jin, a steely resolve in her eyes. "Prepare for battle," she ordered. "We've got company." Outside, the vast nothingness of space was pierced by the sudden arrival of Drexar warships. 14 of them dropped out of warp, their signatures unmistakable. A Reaver-class ship, known for its ferocity, was leading the charge. Vale's lips curled into a cold smile. "Sending dogs to sniff us out," she muttered, her tone dripping with disdain. "Orders?" Jin asked, raising an eyebrow. Vale leaned over the comms console. "Let them sniff. We'll bait them." The vengeance did not cloak this time. It didn't need to. Instead, it stayed visible, its dark hull gleaming under the distant stars, inviting the Drexar ships to approach. A challenge. One of the Drexar warships pulsed a warning signal, a standard message meant to intimidate. "Stand down. Prepare for capture." Vale didn't even flinch. "Play the message," she ordered. Jin tapped a few keys, and the distorted voice of a human crackled over the comms, rough and gravelly, carrying an edge of anger. "To the Drexar overmind you wanted to conquer. You should have checked under the bed before waking the monster. You want war? You just found it." The message cut off. The vengeance didn't wait for a response. The rail core was already fully charged. "Fire," Vale commanded. With a thunderous roar, the vengeance unleashed its second rail core round, a projectile of unimaginable density and force. The round screamed through space, tearing through the Drexar Reaver ship with ease. The impact was catastrophic. The Drexar ship exploded in a spray of molten metal and debris. Its hull cleaved in two like a melon under a hammer. The shock wave from the explosion caught 2 other Drexar ships in its blast radius, tearing them apart as well. In a panic, the remaining Drexar ships scattered, retreating in disarray. They had never experienced anything like this. But Vale wasn't interested in chasing them down. Her goal wasn't to pursue them. It was to make them fear the humans. To make the Drexar understand that humanity was no longer weak or forgotten. It was hunting them. For the first time in their history, the Drexar had felt fear. Not the primal terror they instilled in other species, but something far worse. The fear of the unknown. The fear of something unpredictable. Something they couldn't control. Back at the Drexar Overmind's command center, an urgency settled in. The strategists, grotesque telepathic brains suspended in nutrient tanks, had never anticipated this. They had long seen humanity as a lost cause, a species too unpredictable to even consider a threat. But after what had just happened, that perception had shifted. Now, they had to confront the possibility that humanity was more than a forgotten race. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Drexar called for reinforcements, preparing to hit Goran Prime with double the force they had originally planned. They were embarrassed, angry, and determined to bury the shame of their retreat. But even as they regrouped, The whispers continued to grow louder. Humans were no longer a myth. They were real, and they were coming back. The Drexar, bruised and humiliated, weren't ready to admit defeat. They couldn't afford to show weakness, not after retreating from the HSS Vengeance. Their overmind, an intelligence of vast telepathic power, understood one thing very clearly now. Humanity was not a species to ignore. The fear they felt wasn't just an emotional response. It was an alarm, a signal that told them to prepare for something unpredictable, something they couldn't fully comprehend. In the cold depths of space, far from the Council's watchful eye, the HSS Vengeance drifted silently. It was no longer just a ship. It was the symbol of a species' return from the edge of oblivion. Commander Vale stood at the helm, staring at the stars, her face a mask of calm determination. Behind her, the crew moved with precision, each person knowing their role in this war. They had no illusions about the stakes. This wasn't about a single ship or a single battle. It was about humanity's place in the galaxy. Commander, Jin's voice broke through the quiet. We've received another ping. Drexar warships, 11 this time. Vale didn't even blink. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant stars. How many Reaver-class ships? She asked, her voice low, steady. 2, Jin replied, his fingers flying across the console. And the rest are standard assault class. Vale smirked. Let them come. We're not running. Not this time. Her hands tightened on the armrest of the command chair. They had enough firepower to make a statement, but they couldn't afford to waste it. The Vengeance was still a relic of an older war, not the cutting-edge technology of the galactic powers. But that didn't matter. What humanity had was something far more valuable: resilience. And the Drexar were about to learn that the hard way. The battle was inevitable. The Drexar ships came into view, cutting through the blackness of space, their weapons charging in preparation. They thought they had the upper hand. They were wrong. The HSS Vengeance didn't move. It didn't need to. The Drexar ships approached, weapons raised, ready to unleash their devastating firepower. But the Vengeance had something they weren't prepared for. Activate the rail core, Vale commanded, her voice calm but full of deadly intent. Jin complied immediately, his fingers a blur on the console. Rail core online, ready to fire on your mark. The Drexar ships continued their advance, unaware of the trap that had been set. The Vengeance remained still, a silent predator biding its time. The first of the Drexar ships moved in close, its weapons blazing with unrelenting fury. But before it could fire, the Vengeance unleashed its power. The railcore's shot tore through the Drexar ship's shields with terrifying ease. The blast was so concentrated, so dense, that the ship didn't stand a chance. Its hull buckled, cracked, and then exploded in a brilliant flash of fire and metal. The shockwave from the blast sent the other Drexar vessels into chaos as they scrambled to evade the sudden destruction of their comrade. But the Vengeance wasn't finished. Lock on to the second Reaver class, Vale ordered, her voice a deadly whisper. Jin's fingers moved faster. Locked on. The second Reaver-class ship was already charging its weapons, its engines blazing with aggressive energy. It was faster than the first, more maneuverable, but it was also overconfident, believing that its superior firepower would overwhelm a single human warship. It was wrong. The Vengeance fired again, the rail core round screaming through space, so fast and so powerful that even the Drexar didn't have time to react. The second Reaver-class ship was torn apart, its shields disintegrating under the concentrated power of the blast. The ship fragmented, its pieces spiraling into the void. Now, the Drexar were truly panicked. For the first time, they were not in control. They didn't know how to fight a species that didn't follow the rules. Their hive mind, normally so precise and calculated, was now in disarray. Fear was spreading, and it was more dangerous than any weapon the humans had. Vale allowed herself a small, satisfied smirk. She could feel the weight of the moment, the shift in power. For the first time in years, humanity had become more than a forgotten relic. They were a force. Jin turned to her, his eyes wide. "Commander, they're retreating. They're pulling back." Vale's smirk faded, replaced by a hard, focused expression. "Let them run. They've made their choice." But the retreat wasn't the end of the Drexar's actions. It was only the beginning of their fear. The HSS Vengeance wasn't just a warning shot. It was a signal to the rest of the galaxy. The Drexar may have thought they could conquer anything in their path, but humanity was different. Humanity wasn't bound by the same rules, and now the galaxy was about to learn that humanity had no intention of remaining silent any longer. The Drexar regrouped quickly, realizing that the Vengeance wasn't the only human ship in the galaxy. If humanity had managed to bring a single warship from the depths of obscurity, there had to be more. And the Overmind, realizing the potential threat, immediately issued orders for an even more aggressive assault. The next target was clear: Earth. The Drexar weren't fools. They had underestimated humanity once, and they weren't about to make the same mistake twice. Their retreat from the HSS Vengeance had been humiliating, but now the Overmind had a new plan, one that would wipe humanity from the galaxy before it could become any more of a problem. The Overmind's neural network, a vast and interconnected intelligence, pulsed with urgency. It wasn't just responding to the defeat at the hands of the Vengeance. It was adapting. The Drexar had been the most brutal force the galaxy had ever known, and they had been made to fear one single ship. That fear was something the Overmind could not afford. And so, it shifted its strategy. It called for reinforcements, but not the usual waves of ships and drones. This time, it was different. The Drexar needed to send something far more terrifying, something that would crush any lingering hope the galaxy might have had in humanity. "Prepare the Warcast." The Overmind's command resonated through the hive mind. The Warcast were ancient entities, the stuff of Drexar legend. They were not mere ships, not even living creatures as the galaxy understood them. They were something far worse, a fusion of Drexar biotechnology and living weaponry, monstrosities that had been bred in the earliest days of the Drexar conquest. The Warcast didn't just fight, they devoured. They were created to be the ultimate destroyers, their very existence a testament to the Drexar's ruthless desire for domination. But even as the Drexar prepared their most devastating weapon, something had shifted in the heart of the HSS Vengeance. Humanity wasn't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back. Commander Vale, though weary from her ship's grueling journey, stood at the helm of her warship, staring at the stars ahead. The galaxy was in turmoil, and humanity was caught in the middle. Yet in her mind, the question wasn't how to survive. It was how to win. "Jin," "What's our status?" Vale asked, her voice strained from the constant pressure. Jin was still at his console, scanning the latest incoming data. "The Drexar are on the move again," he said, his voice tight. "They're massing ships in Sector 12, large concentrations, including some kind of specialized vessel. And it looks like they're heading toward Earth." Vale's eyes narrowed. "Of course they are. They think they can just walk all over us." She paused, taking a breath, her hands tightening around the edges of her command chair. "Get me the fleet." Jin nodded, immediately routing a signal to the rest of the human warships in the area. The message was clear. Humanity was ready. They had been waiting for the right moment, and now it had arrived. In the depths of Earth's hidden command center, the Cradle, the leaders of humanity's underground military complex were already making preparations. For decades, they had watched the galaxy fall into chaos, knowing that one day the Drexar would come for them. The Cradle wasn't just a shelter. It was a fortress, a complex designed to protect humanity's most valuable asset, its ability to fight. Beneath layers of reinforced rock and neutronium steel, the highest-ranking military officials stood around a glowing holographic table, staring at the simulated battlefield spread out before them. General Reeves, one of the few men who still remembered the horrors of the past wars, was the first to speak. "They're coming for Earth, and this time they're bringing everything." No surprise there. Commander Vale's voice crackled through the comms, sounding steady despite the chaos unfolding. "But we've got one advantage this time. They've never seen humanity fight as one." Reeves looked over at the other commanders. "It's time," he said, his voice grim but resolute. "Activate the fleet. It's now or never." Across the Cradle, alarms blared as massive hangars filled with ships the size of cities began to roar to life. These ships had long been thought destroyed, their war machines buried deep in the heart of Earth's most secretive military complexes. But they were not gone. They had simply been waiting for this moment. These warships were not peacekeepers. They were avengers. The HSS Retribution, the largest of the human warships, powered up its engines, its massive frame trembling as it came online. Around it, dozens of other ships followed suit. The HSS Warlord, the HSS Ghosthammer, the HSS Final Dawn. Each one was a symbol of humanity's last stand, each one a piece of the puzzle that would save the galaxy from the Drexar's relentless tide. Back on the HSS Vengeance, Commander Vale, standing at the edge of the command deck, felt the weight of the moment settle around her. The fleet was finally on the move. The Drexar might have thought they had humanity on the ropes, but they hadn't accounted for this. The humans weren't afraid of dying. They had lived through the worst and come out stronger, smarter, and more deadly. "Commander," Jin said, his voice tight with urgency, "we've got incoming. Drexar Warcast. It's massive, even bigger than we thought." Vale turned toward him, her face hardening as she scanned the readings. "Warcast," she muttered, as if tasting the word. "The Drexar think they can bring out their worst and break us. Let them." The Vengeance's engines hummed to life, its massive bulk turning toward the approaching threat. The Warcast was a nightmare, a creature the size of a moon, biomechanical and terrifying. It wasn't just a ship, it was a living weapon, a beast, forged in the fires of Drexar's earliest conquests. The battle had begun. As the Warcast approached, the fleet of human ships emerged from Earth's atmosphere, breaking through the clouds of the planet's shattered skies. They were a sight to behold, their black hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. They had no time for cloaks, no time for subtlety. The HSS Retribution led the charge, its massive cannons powered up and ready to fire. "Open fire," General Reeves ordered from Earth Command, his voice filled with grim determination. From orbit, the Retribution unleashed a barrage of fire, its cannons roaring as they launched devastating energy blasts at the Warcast. But the creature was no easy target. The weapons tore through the Warcast's thick outer shell, but it barely flinched. It responded with a guttural roar, its massive limbs lashing out as it fired back with devastating force, unleashing a volley of acid-tipped projectiles that streaked through space like deadly comets. But the human fleet wasn't backing down. They knew they were facing the ultimate threat, but they had something the Drexar didn't: unity. The ships of Earth swarmed the Warcast, firing relentlessly, weaving through the battle like a swarm of bees, dodging the Warcast's retaliatory fire while delivering blow after blow. It was a brawl, a brutal, no-holds-barred fight. The Warcast, despite its size and power, wasn't prepared for this kind of warfare. It was slow, lumbering, and its attacks, though devastating, lacked the speed and precision of the human ships. The HSS Vengeance was back in the thick of it. Its rail core was online, charged and ready. Vale's voice rang out over the comms. "We've got one shot. We make it count." Jin nodded, eyes focused on the targeting systems. "Locked on," he said, his voice full of anticipation. The Vengeance surged forward, cutting through the chaos like a knife. The Warcast turned toward it, its massive limbs twitching in a desperate attempt to bring its full power to bear. But it was too late. Vale's eyes narrowed. "Fire!" The rail core fired. The rail core shot erupted from the HSS Vengeance with a deafening roar, its dense projectile tearing through the vacuum of space at unimaginable speeds. It was the weapon humanity had forged in secret, and now it was the only thing that stood between Earth and total destruction. The shot was not just a piece of technology, it was a symbol, a message sent to the galaxy that humanity would not be broken. The Vengeance's crew, knowing this might be their final chance, held their breath as the weapon hurtled toward the massive Warcast. The massive Warcast, a creature forged from Drexar's most ancient and horrific technology, saw the incoming strike too late. Its massive, alien eyes, too many to count, blinked in confusion, its organic parts shifting as the weapon closed in. It roared, a sound that vibrated through the very fabric of space itself, a deep, primal growl that sent waves of energy radiating out from its form. Its thick, armored hide shuddered under the intense strain of the shot's approach, but it didn't move. The beast was too vast, too arrogant to recognize its imminent demise. Then the rail core struck. The impact was nothing short of catastrophic. The projectile hit the Warcast's central core, the one weak spot that the Drexar had always protected, and it tore through the creature's defenses as though they were paper. For the briefest of moments, there was a pause, a strange silence in space. No explosion, no fire, just the vacuum of space pushing the remnants of the Warcast's flesh away from the point of impact. Then, the Warcast's body exploded in a flash of brilliant light. It wasn't just an explosion. It was as if the creature had imploded, its insides cascading outward in a cloud of shredded metal, biological matter, and sparks. The shock wave of the blast, was felt all throughout the battlefield. Smaller Drexar vessels were caught in the blast, their fragile frames torn apart by the sheer power of the explosion. The HSS Vengeance shook violently, its hull rattling as the shockwave reverberated through the ship. The crew gritted their teeth, knowing that they had just faced down the most terrifying weapon the Drexar had ever created and destroyed it in a single shot. But the victory was short-lived. As the remnants of the Warcast's carcass drifted through space, the remaining Drexar warships did not retreat. Instead, they regrouped, circling around the wreckage like vultures, their weapons charging once more. The Warcast had been their last and most formidable weapon, but the Drexar were far from finished. They had underestimated humanity, yes, but their hive mind was relentless. The Overmind had already begun analyzing the failure, calculating its next move. The Drexar's capacity for destruction was nearly limitless, and they would not be deterred by one loss. The Warcast is down, but they're not retreating, Jin said, his voice tense with worry. He was staring at the screens in front of him, watching as more Drexar ships converged on their position. They're doubling down. Vale stood motionless, her eyes locked on the stars beyond the bridge. She knew the Drexar would never stop coming. Not after they had been humiliated. Not after they had been made to feel fear for the first time in centuries. But they had also made a grave mistake. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were fighting. And now, the Drexar were about to learn what it meant to face a species that had nothing left to lose. "Commander," Jin called, urgency creeping into his voice. "We're outgunned. Our shields are at 30%, and we've got incoming fire from all sides." Vale didn't even flinch. She had seen worse. "Divert power to shields, and get me aligned to the Retribution," she ordered, her voice calm but hard as iron. "We need backup. Now." The HSS Retribution, the flagship of the human fleet, had been in the thick of the battle since the first shots had been fired. Its massive size and firepower made it a formidable presence, but even it was starting to show signs of strain. General Reeves, overseeing the battle from the command center aboard the Retribution, was watching the situation unfold with a growing sense of unease. The Drexar's numbers were overwhelming, and despite humanity's tenacity, there was only so much they could do with the limited resources at their disposal. "General," one of the officers on the Retribution's bridge said, his voice shaky, "we've taken multiple hits. The Warcast is gone, but the swarm's not backing down. They're calling in reinforcements from every sector." Reeves clenched his fists, his face hardening. "It's time we show them what real war looks like." He turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare the Judgment Corps. We'll fire on their command ship." The Retribution's weapon systems hummed to life, charging up the massive cannon that had earned its name. The Judgment Corps was one of Earth's most destructive weapons, capable of firing a solid quantum fusion shell that would tear through anything in its path. The Drexar had never seen anything like it, and once the shell hit its target, there would be no hope of survival. "Fire!" Reeves barked. The Retribution fired. The massive fusion shell shot out from the Retribution's cannon with an earth-shaking force, cutting through space as if it were cutting through butter. The Drexar's flagship, a massive hive ship that served as their command center, had no time to react. The shell struck it dead center, and the resulting explosion was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The blast created a shock wave so intense that even the Vengeance felt it, and for a brief moment, the entire battlefield was bathed in light. But the Drexar were relentless, and even as their command ship was torn apart, they didn't hesitate. Their mindless aggression was a double-edged sword. They had no concept of retreat. They could not process the idea of failure. And now, they were angry. "Commander," Jin's voice broke through again. "The Drexar are escalating. They're pulling in their full fleet, every ship they've got, and they're heading straight for Earth." Vale's eyes darkened, her mind racing as she calculated their next move. "Get us to Earth," she said, her voice colder than ever. "We're not running anymore. We're taking this fight to them." Outside, the stars flickered as the full might of the Drexar fleet descended on Earth. The HSS Vengeance and its fleet were all that stood between humanity and annihilation. But even with all their firepower, even with all their determination, they knew one thing: the Drexar were not going to stop. The war was about to reach its final stage, and the galaxy was watching. The Drexar fleet descended upon Earth like a storm of destruction. The sky, once silent and distant, now echoed with the shriek of countless warships cutting through the blackness of space. The HSS Vengeance and its fleet stood at the forefront of the human defense, battered but unbowed. Commander Vale's face was hard as stone as she watched the Drexar ships gather in a deadly formation. There was no going back now. "Commander, the fleet is in position," Jin reported, his voice tense. "We've got their full attention." Vale nodded. "Good. Let them have it." The Vengeance surged forward, its weapons primed and ready. The other ships of the human fleet followed, cutting through space with unmatched determination. The battle had only one outcome now. Humanity would either win, or it would cease to exist. But as the Drexar ships closed in, the humans didn't hesitate. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about taking back the galaxy, about proving that no species could erase them from existence. The Drexar opened fire first, their weapons streaking across space like deadly comets. The Vengeance and its fleet responded with equal ferocity, their own firepower lighting up the dark expanse. Explosions rocked the battlefield as ships on both sides were torn apart in violent bursts of energy. The sound of metal twisting, shields shattering, and fire erupting was deafening, even through the vacuum of space. Through the chaos, Commander Vale kept her cool, eyes locked on the approaching Drexar flagship. It was massive, bristling with weapons, and it had only one purpose: to crush humanity once and for all. "Focus fire on their command ship," Vale ordered, voice steady, despite the intensity of the battle. The Vengeance fired its rail core once again, but this time it wasn't alone. The Retribution, Warlord, Ghost Hammer, and dozens of other human warships unleashed their weapons as well. The air around the Drexar flagship lit up with the barrage, and for a moment, the massive ship seemed to shudder. But it wasn't enough. The Drexar flagship fought back, unleashing an onslaught of plasma and energy blasts that rocked the human ships, tearing them apart. Despite their best efforts, the Drexar were relentless. They were more than just invaders. They were a swarm, a collective mind that could think and react faster than any single ship. They adapted as quickly as humanity fought back, always one step ahead. And yet, there was something the Drexar never considered: humanity's spirit. It was unpredictable, unstoppable, and unyielding. As the battle raged, something shifted in the humans' favor. The Drexar flagship, despite its power, was beginning to buckle. The shields were weakening, the hull cracking under the constant barrage. The Vengeance fired again, this time with precision. The rail core struck the flagship's core, sending shock waves rippling through its massive form. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, the flagship exploded. The shock wave rippled through space, sending smaller Drexar ships scattering in all directions. The Vengeance shook violently from the blast, its hull creaking under the pressure. But it held firm. For the first time since the battle began, the Drexar fleet faltered. General Reeves, aboard the Retribution, gave the order. Full fleet assault. Push them back. We finish this now. With that, the combined might of humanity's forces surged forward. Every ship, every gun, every fighter was aimed at the remaining Drexar ships, determined to end this once and for all. The Drexar, despite their overwhelming numbers, began to crumble. Their fear of the humans, had finally broken their will. Minutes later, the Drexar forces, leaderless and scattered, retreated into the depths of space. The remnants of their fleet limped away, their ships burning and broken. The Overmind's consciousness flickered, its hive mind destabilized by the loss of their flagship, and the Drexar were forced to pull back. The battle was over. Back on Earth, the human fleet stood victorious. The stars were silent once more, and the destruction that had once seemed inevitable was now a fading memory. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had faced the galaxy's greatest threat, fought against impossible odds, and come out victorious. Commander Vale stood at the helm of the Vengeance, her eyes fixed on the calm of space. She had lost friends. She had lost her ship. But in the end, humanity had won. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. It wasn't just about defending a single planet. It was about sending a message to the galaxy. Humanity was back, and they were not just survivors. They were warriors. As the Vengeance limped toward Earth, the ship's crew began to cheer, their voices echoing through the corridors. But Vale remained quiet. There was no time for celebration. The Drexar had retreated, but they weren't gone. "We may have won today," Vale said quietly, her voice a low murmur over the comms. "But the war isn't over. They'll be back, and when they return, we'll be waiting." Across the galaxy, the message was clear. Humanity had risen from the ashes, not as conquerors, but as the last line of defense against extinction, and they would fight until the stars themselves burned out. As the Vengeance entered Earth's orbit, a new era began. The galaxy, for the first time in millennia, had a new power to reckon with. The Council, once dismissive of humanity, had no choice but to face the truth. Humanity had proven that, when pushed to the brink, they would fight back with everything they had. The HSS Vengeance had delivered its final message. We are here, and we will not be erased. And somewhere, out in the darkness of space, the Drexar were already planning their next move. But this time, they would find something they had never expected. A galaxy united in the face of a common enemy, with humanity leading the charge. The war was not over, but humanity had found its place in the stars, and it would fight for it.